He pointed a gun at me in broad daylight outside a supermarket in front of my daughters, over a hoodie and the color of my skin. He had no idea I was an FBI agent, but the moment I showed my badge, his face turned from rage to fear. What he didn't know was that this wouldn't just cost him his job. It would expose an entire corrupt system, ignite a nationwide movement, and turn one man's survival into a firestorm for justice. This is the true story of how a racist cop tried to silence the wrong man, and what happened when the whole country finally listened. That day, he pointed a gun at my face right there in the middle of a supermarket parking lot. Not because I was a threat, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I wore a plain black hoodie and my skin was dark. Behind him stood Officer Paul Whitaker, white buzz-cut mid-40s, hand on his holster mouth, curled in a sneer, the kind that grows from decades of unchecked power. He wore his badge like a shield, but today it was a mask for fear. I could hear the silence before the screams. A mother clutching her child froze in the doorway. A manager dropped his clipboard. A shopping cart rolled off into a car. The air was thick, choking on disbelief, rage, and humiliation, and I stood there calm as stone, because I wasn't just a man buying milk and apples that day. I was an FBI agent, but they didn't know that yet. My name is Jerome Wells, 42 years old. I live in East Virginia with my wife and 2 daughters. To the neighbors, I'm just the quiet guy who gardens on Sundays and waves at the mailman. No flash, no fuss. They don't see the years I spent undercover busting trafficking rings, or the 3 bullets that still live in my body like ghostly reminders. I don't wear my badge outside the bureau. I don't need to. Respect, after all, isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. But that morning I had taken a day off to surprise my youngest with her favorite cereal. I wasn't even wearing my service weapon. Just jeans, that hoodie, and my wedding ring. I parked my car, stepped out with 2 grocery bags, and that's when I heard the command. Drop the bags, hands where I can see them. At first, I didn't think it was meant for me. I looked around, no one else. Then, the sharp click of a safety being turned off. I turned slowly, heart-calm, eyes direct. That's when I saw him, Officer Whitaker. One arm, outstretched finger, trembling on the trigger. His partner, a younger rookie I didn't recognize, stood behind him, lips parted, uncertain. People were watching. Phones were raised. But fear still ruled the air. "Sir," I said, voice steady, "you're making a mistake." I said, down on the ground. He was trembling, not from courage, but from something darker, panic, prejudice. Then he said it. "We got a call about a suspicious black male matching your description." Matching what A, hoodie groceries. I knelt down, not out of fear, but calculation. I wasn't going to die in a supermarket parking lot. Not for cereal and apples. Not today. Paul Whitaker wasn't new to this town. He'd been on the force nearly 20 years. A relic of an era that refused to die. His eyes were always searching not for danger, but for someone to dominate. To make an example of. I'd seen his type 100 times, bullies with a badge. He'd had complaints before. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse, all swept under the rug, papered over by a good old boys system and a police union that thought accountability was a joke. But this time, he picked the wrong man. I slowly reached into my back pocket. He screamed, "He's got a gun!" But before he could react, I held up my badge. Shiny, real, unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Jerome Wells. His mouth fell open. The rookie gasped. I stood, badge still raised. The crowd erupted not in panic but in fury. He pointed a gun at an FBI agent. "Oh my God, did you see that? Is this what justice looks like?" Phones were still recording. I didn't need to say anything else. Then, like thunder cutting the clouds, came another voice. "Put that weapon down, Officer Whittaker. Chief Alana Torres. Latina. Mid-50s. Short, cropped hair, gray at the temples, no nonsense." She had appeared like judgment itself, her patrol SUV screeching to a halt, door swinging open. Whittaker froze. "Now, officer, before you regret it." He hesitated. For a second, I thought he might turn the gun on her. But reality crashed into him like a wave. His hand lowered. The gun dropped. Clinked on the asphalt like a broken oath. And then, Chief Torres said 5 words I'll never forget. "You're fired. Right. Now." The crowd gasped. Whittaker stood paralyzed. "You just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal agent who posed zero threat on camera." "You're done, Paul." He opened his mouth to protest, but no one listened. She turned to me. "Agent Wells. Are you okay?" "I am now." She nodded. "Would you like to press charges?" I stared at Whittaker. The man who thought I was less than human just minutes ago now looked like a child caught in a fire he started. "I won't press charges," I said. "But I want a public apology. For me and every black man you've ever treated like this." And that's when the real reckoning began. They say justice is blind, but in my world, justice has eyes. Tired eyes. Eyes that have seen too many brothers buried for holding a phone. Too many sisters handcuffed for raising their voices. After that day in the parking lot, I knew this story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every time someone like Officer Paul Whittaker pointed a gun and thought his badge made him God. But now the world had seen it too. I didn't sleep that night. The footage had gone viral within hours. A local reporter had picked it up and pushed it to national news. Within a day, I was getting calls from CNN, MSNBC, even BBC. I refused them all. I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking for reckoning. Still, the silence from the police department was deafening. No press conference, no statement, no apology. Only one voice spoke clearly in the dark Chief Alana Torres. She came to my house the next morning. I watched her from the porch as she parked her cruiser. She wore no makeup, no smile. Just a dark blue shirt with her name tag slightly off-center and eyes like carved stone. "I shouldn't be here," she said, "but I had to see you." Off the record. I nodded. She sat down beside me, took off her cap, and exhaled deeply. Internal affairs is scrambling. The mayor's office is furious. They want to bury this call at a misunderstanding. But I won't let them. I studied her face. She meant it. I want Whittaker gone for good. Not just fired, stripped of pension, decertified. But I need your help. How? I need a public statement from you. Not as an FBI agent. As a man. As the man they pointed a gun at for shopping while black. I clenched my jaw. "You sure this isn't just about optics?" She didn't blink. If it were, I wouldn't be here. I made my statement that evening. I stood at a wooden podium in front of the local community center. Hundreds gathered. Not just black folks, white, Hispanic, Asian, young, old teachers, veterans. People who'd seen the video and couldn't unsee it. My name is Jerome Wells. I'm a father, a husband, a federal agent. And yesterday I was nearly killed for buying cereal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I paused, let the words settle. I had a badge in my pocket. But what if I hadn't? What if I was just another man trying to live his life in peace? Would I be 6 feet under while the city called it an unfortunate tragedy? Cameras flashed. But I wasn't speaking for them. I am not here to demand vengeance. I am here to demand change. And to ask you, how many more videos do you need before we stop pretending this isn't real? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with purpose. That night the city didn't sleep either. Paul Whitaker's defenders came out like cockroaches. A former captain called it a lapse in judgment. A cable pundit said I should have identified myself sooner. Even his own union attorney tried to spin it as a moment of confusion in a high-stress situation. But none of them could erase what the video showed. A man who saw blackness as danger. A man who panicked at skin, not behavior. A man who had done this before, just never to someone who could fight back. But this time he had, and the cracks began to widen. A week later, Chief Torres held a press conference. It was blistering. In light of Officer Whitaker's long history of complaints, internal reports previously suppressed, and the recent supermarket incident, we are opening a full investigation into misconduct within the department. She didn't say it, but we all knew what that meant. The code of silence was cracking. One by one, anonymous letters began leaking to the press current officers sharing stories of Whitaker, belittling suspects, falsifying stop reports, even planting evidence in at least one traffic case. He hadn't just been a bad apple. He had poisoned the orchard. But even poison can be traced. On the third week, I got a visit from someone I never thought would stand on my porch. His name was Marcus Lane. Tall, mid-30s, light-skinned eyes like molten copper. He wore a gray sweater and jeans, but something about his posture screamed restraint, like he'd been carrying a secret for far too long. "You don't know me," he said, "but I was one of Whitaker's trainees, and I'm done protecting him." I stepped aside and let him in. For 3 hours, Marcus laid out a history of abuse, false arrests, physical intimidation, racial slurs masked as jokes, supervisors who turned their heads, files that were quietly deleted. Then he pulled out a USB drive, body cam footage from last year, supposedly lost in the system. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. The clip showed a young black teenager being pushed face first into the hood of a police car. Blood ran from his mouth. Whitaker's voice sneered off camera, "Don't squirm, boy. You don't want to be another headline, do you?" I felt sick. This kid, he's only 15, still has night terrors. His mom filed a complaint. It disappeared. Marcus looked at me. Do what I couldn't. End this. That night I sent the clip to Chief Torres and to a dozen news stations. By dawn, the whole country was watching. Whitaker was no longer a cop. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong and everything we still needed to fix. By the third week, I no longer walked alone, not metaphorically, and certainly not literally. I had received over 200 messages from families across the country. Some offered prayers, others offered stories. Stories of loved ones who never made it out of traffic stops or courtrooms or jail cells. Stories that sounded like mine only without the badge to protect them. But something deeper was happening now. It wasn't just about Paul Whitaker anymore. The entire system had been put on notice. And I was no longer just an FBI agent. I was a witness, a symbol, a threat. I was summoned to testify, not in court, but before a federal review board investigating civil rights violations in local law enforcement. The hearing was scheduled at the U.S. District Court in Richmond. It wasn't publicized, but word traveled fast. When I arrived that morning, the courthouse steps were lined with people mothers holding photos, veterans in wheelchairs, teenagers in hoodies, ministers holding signs that read, "Truth demands witnesses." As I stepped through the security gates, a woman's voice rose from the crowd. Tell them, Agent Wells. Tell them everything. And I would. Inside the chamber, I faced 5 panelists. 3 men, 2 women. Suits sharp as razors. Their eyes unreadable. A lawyer for the police department sat to my left. A federal prosecutor sat to my right. But I wasn't nervous. I had lived through gunfire, riots, betrayals. I had already faced the barrel of a gun in broad daylight. What more could they take? The chairman leaned in. Agent Wells, please recount the events of August 7th. So I did, in precise, brutal detail. I described the moment I stepped out of my car. The shout, the gun, the shaking finger on the trigger, the silence of everyone who watched. And then I said something I hadn't admitted aloud before. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid my daughters would only remember me through a video. Gasps filled the room. The chairman looked up. And what happened after? I showed my badge. A pause. And did Officer Whitaker lower his weapon? No, not right away. Why do you think that is? Because he didn't see a badge. He only saw a black man. That was the moment everything shifted. One of the panelists, a tall black woman with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. Agent Wells, are you aware that Officer Whitaker had 6 previous misconduct complaints? I am now. And that each of those complaints was marked unsubstantiated within 48 hours. I've seen the paperwork. I've seen the body cam footage that never made it to evidence. Another panelist raised a thick folder. 32 traffic stops. 28 involved people of color. 12 involved minors. 4 involved weapons being drawn. And not one led to a conviction. The prosecutor added quietly, "We believe Whitaker was protected by a corrupt chain of command." Then he looked at me. "Would you support a federal investigation into the precinct?" I didn't blink. I'd lead it. 3 days later, the DOJ launched a probe, not just into the department, but into the city's entire law enforcement structure. Subpoenas were issued. Computers seized. Officers brought in for questioning. And then the biggest bombshell dropped. The police chief before Alana Torres had buried complaints for years. His name was Gordon Leeds. Retired. Golf playing. Church going. But beneath his manicured lawn and Rotary Club smile was a mountain of corruption. He had shut down internal affairs probes, intimidated whistleblowers, even deleted dashcam logs from DUI stops involving his friends. And yes, he had protected Whitaker. I confronted Chief Torres that same week. We met in her office. Blinds closed. 2 mugs of untouched coffee sat on the desk. "You knew something was wrong before I got dragged into this," I said. She nodded. I knew the department had rot, but I didn't know how deep. "Then why didn't you act sooner?" Her eyes were tired. "Because every time I tried, someone threatened to leak my husband's immigration status or sabotage my daughter's scholarship. I was surviving in a system designed to eat its reformers alive." I sat in silence. I understood. But understanding didn't mean acceptance. "You're the chief now. That means you fight." No more silence. She met my gaze. "Then fight with me." We began holding town halls. Open meetings, no media spin, just truth. I stood before families and listened. Sometimes I just held their hands. Other times I spoke. We have to believe that change isn't just possible. It's necessary. If we don't fix this system, the next name we chant could be your brother, or your son, or mine. One night, a teenage boy approached me after the crowd had left. He wore a red hoodie and trembled as he spoke. "I saw your video. I was in the store that day. I saw everything." I asked his name. "Jaden." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a sketchbook. On the first page was a drawing. It was me, kneeling, holding my badge up, surrounded by guns, cameras, eyes. But in the drawing, my hand wasn't just holding a badge. It was holding a torch, lighting the darkness. I went home and cried, not out of weakness, but because I finally knew this wasn't just a story about injustice. It was a story about awakening. Change never comes without blood. Not always the kind that spills, but the kind that boils under pressure, under scrutiny, under fear. And in the weeks after my testimony, the system began to boil. They didn't come for me with bullets. No, these cowards used whispers. Anonymous threats slipped under my door. A severed brake line on my wife's car. A routine inspection at my daughter's school that left her crying in a locked janitor's closet for 3 hours. They thought fear would make me stop. But they didn't understand one thing: I was already a man who had faced death and lived to tell the truth. The investigation spread like fire. At least 4 officers were suspended. A dozen old complaints reopened. More footage surfaced, body cams, dash cams, even secret recordings made by one brave dispatcher who'd been ignored for years. The press labeled it the Richmond Reckoning, but behind the headlines was a war none of them saw. My mailbox was filled with hate mail. Race traitor. Blue lives matter, not yours. I hope they finish what Whitaker started. Even my old bureau colleagues were split. Some called me a hero. Others avoided me in the hallway as if truth was contagious. One afternoon, I received a call from Deputy Director Simmons. He didn't mince words. "Jerome, you're making noise we can't ignore." With all due respect, sir, the noise was there. I'm just the one refusing to turn it down. A pause. "You're putting a target on your back." I smiled bitterly. Good. Let them aim. But the real hit came that Friday morning. I was suspended from the bureau. Administrative leave, pending internal review. They claimed it was protocol. That going public with active investigations breached conduct. But we both knew it was retaliation. They wanted me silenced, discredited, neutered. And suddenly everything in me snapped. I went to see Chief Torres that night. Her office lights were off, but I knew she was inside. She was always inside, like a general in a battlefield bunker. She opened the door, saw my face, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey before I said a word. "I got benched," I said. She didn't blink. "So did I." "What?" They reassigned me. Said I escalated a sensitive local matter without approval. I'm on desk duty now. For a moment, we just sat in silence. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "We're winning." The next day, we met with Marcus Lane, the ex-trainee who had leaked the damning body cam footage. He was shaking when he walked into the safe house we'd rented under a false name. "They've been watching my apartment," he said. "I think someone's been in my car." I handed him a burner phone and nodded. "You still with us?" He looked me dead in the eyes. "They took my career. They're not taking my soul." Together, we compiled everything. Whistleblower affidavits, sealed documents, deleted logs recovered by a rogue IT tech we'd recruited. And then, we sent it all to someone no one expected. Congresswoman Yvette Rollins. Black. Fiery. Known for blowing up closed-door hearings with facts that cut like blades. She took one look at the files and booked a flight. "I'm holding a public forum," she said. "Right here. In Richmond. In the heart of the storm." And then the story exploded again. The day of the forum was electric. It was held in the high school gym. The same one where my eldest daughter had her last dance recital. But this time, instead of cheerleaders, the bleachers held the pastors, civil rights attorneys, national reporters, and people, hundreds of them, many wearing shirts that read, "We stand with Wells." The congresswoman stood at the podium and held up a single photo. It was the boy from the lost body cam footage, bloodied, terrified. This child, she said, was brutalized. Not in a war zone. Not in a third world dictatorship. But here. in our city, by a man with a badge and a silence that protected him. The crowd murmured, cried, roared. I stood in the back, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to see them rise. And they did. One by one, victims of police abuse came forward. A bus driver with a broken arm, a grandmother falsely arrested for trespassing on her own lawn, a 17-year-old girl dragged from her car for talking back. Each story a bullet, each truth a blow to the fortress of lies. Then something happened I didn't expect. A voice called from the back. "Can I speak?" It was Officer Greg Madsen, one of Whitaker's former partners. He walked slowly to the microphone, pale, sweating. I was silent for years. I saw what Paul did. I laughed. I shrugged it off. And I told myself it wasn't my job to stop him. He looked at me. But Agent Wells did. And I can't stay silent anymore. The crowd went quiet. I'm here to confess. I falsified reports. I covered for him. I backed him up when I knew he was lying. And I want to make it right. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire gym stood. Not for me, but for the truth. That night, as the forum ended, I stepped outside and looked up at the stars. For the first time in weeks, I felt something return to me. Hope. And with it, resolve. Because this war wasn't over. But for the first time, we weren't fighting it alone. They tried to kill me that night. There's no other way to say it. No softer version. No polite euphemism. They tried to kill me. And the worst part wasn't the ambush itself. It was the silence that followed. The kind that confirms you've hit a nerve so deep the system stops hiding and starts hunting. It happened 2 nights after the public forum. I had just finished dinner with my family. My girls were upstairs laughing at some TikTok video, and my wife Marissa had her legs curled under her on the couch reading. We had just begun to breathe again, but I had a habit I couldn't shake. Every night I walked our street alone. It wasn't for exercise. It was to remember who I was fighting for. So I slipped on my hoodie, zipped it halfway, and stepped into the cool Virginia air. That's when I heard it. A click, a flicker from the bushes across the street. And then, bang. Pain bloomed across my ribs like a firework. I dropped to one knee, instincts kicking in. Another shot rang out, barely missing my shoulder. I rolled behind the neighbor's SUV, pulled my phone from my pocket, and called 911 with shaking fingers. Agent Downshots fired Elmwood Street send backup now. Then silence again, footsteps running, a car engine revving and vanishing into the night. They hadn't meant to scare me. They'd come to finish what Whitaker started. I was in the hospital for 2 days. The bullet had grazed my side, no organ damage, but deep enough to need 20 stitches. Chief Torres was there when I woke up. So was Marcus. So was Congresswoman Rollins. My wife refused to let go of my hand, but the anger in her eyes. It was the fire now. "They shot you." "Jerome," she whispered. "What if the girls had been outside?" "I know." She leaned close. "Then we don't just fight. We burn the whole rotten tree down." They never caught the shooter. No license plates, no witnesses. But we all knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't a robbery. This was retaliation. And it was a warning. To stop. To fall back. To be quiet. So I did the only thing that made sense. I got louder. While I healed, Congresswoman Rollins pushed the files we gave her into federal hands. The Department of Justice expanded the probe. The mayor of Richmond resigned. 3 more officers turned whistleblower. And quietly, methodically, I began preparing my own case. A civil lawsuit, not just against Whitaker, not just against the city, but against the state. Wells versus the Commonwealth of Virginia. People called me crazy. You'll lose. You'll be destroyed. They'll find dirt on you, and maybe they would. But this wasn't about victory anymore. It was about memory, legacy, making sure that if I didn't make it out alive, the truth did. The court date was set for mid-October. The filings triggered a media frenzy. Some stations dubbed me the man who sued a state. Others spun conspiracy theories, that I had faked the shooting, that I was trying to start a race war, that I was a puppet for radical elements. But nothing hit harder than what happened the week before trial. My daughters were doxxed, their school photos posted online, threats made to send a message to Daddy. That night, Marissa packed their bags and flew them to her sister's house out west. "I can't protect them here," she said through tears. I nodded, my heart shattered. "Go, keep them safe. I'll see you after the storm." But deep down, I didn't know if I would. The trial began with metal detectors, protesters on both sides, and a courtroom filled beyond capacity. I sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer in a suit and tie, but in full FBI dress blues. This time, I wanted them to see exactly who they tried to bury. Across from me sat the state's legal team, polished, cold, ready to deflect, dismiss, and discredit. But I had more than evidence. I had voices, and when the judge gave me the floor, I spoke for every one of them. I stand here not for revenge, but for accountability. For every time a badge was used as a weapon. For every mother who kissed a son goodbye and never saw him return. For every silent cry behind closed doors. This lawsuit is not about me. It's about all of us, and the America we claim to be. Then Marcus Lane testified. Then Greg Madsen. Then the mother of the bloodied boy from the body cam. Each one lit another match, and the court began to smoke. The defense tried to spin it. Isn't it true Agent Wells went public to elevate his own career? Isn't it true you disobeyed Bureau protocol? But my lawyer, Aisha Grant, a civil rights warrior forged in fire, cut through it all with grace and steel. You're blaming a man for surviving a system he was sent to protect. Tell me what protocol governs staying alive. The jury didn't blink, and then came the final bombshell. A hidden audio file recovered from an encrypted precinct server. Whitaker, laughing. If he didn't have that badge, he'd be just another nun in a hoodie. The courtroom fell silent. Gasps, horror. Even the judge looked like she might cry. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict shook the country. Guilty on all counts. Excessive force, negligence, civil rights violations. Damages awarded $15 million. But more importantly, mandatory reform legislation triggered statewide. When I walked out of that courthouse, cameras, flashing, crowds roaring, I wasn't just Agent Jerome Wells anymore. I was a man who had survived everything they threw at him and lit the way for others to walk behind me. Victory doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence earned heavy, echoing silence. I stood on the courthouse steps, a million voices behind me, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. The cameras, the chants, the reporters shouting questions. They blurred into a low hum, because in that moment all I wanted was to go home, to hold my daughters, to breathe beside my wife, to hear someone say my name and not follow it with the man who almost died. 3 days later, I touched down in Arizona. Marissa met me at the airport with eyes red from worry arms, stiff at first. Then, melting into my chest like she was holding on to the last thread of something sacred. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again," she whispered. "You always will," I said. "I promise." But promises like that carry weight, especially now. When I walked into our rented cabin in Sedona, my girls Kendra and Malia looked up from the couch. They didn't say anything, just ran. Wrapped themselves around my waist like tree roots. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Malia asked. I am now, I said, but part of me was still bleeding. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone on the porch under a blanket of stars. The mountains stood in quiet reverence like ancient witnesses to my war, and I wondered what now. Justice had been served, but what had it cost? The bullets may have missed my heart, but something inside me had been shattered. I didn't trust shadows anymore. I jumped at loud noises, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw a trembling finger on a trigger, and the cold certainty that it wouldn't have mattered if I was anyone else. The next morning I got a call. It wasn't from the bureau. It was from the boy. Jaden, the kid with the sketchbook who had drawn me holding the badge like a torch. "Mr. Wells," he said. His voice cracked. You came back." "I did. You still have my drawing." "Framed it," I said. "Hangs above my desk." There was silence. Then, "My school wants to name the new community center after you." I laughed, taken off guard. "Why me?" "Because you made people feel safe." My throat closed up. Jaden wasn't just a boy with a sketch pad. He was part of the reason I lived. The dedication ceremony was simple. No TV crews, no politicians, just folding chairs in the grass. Kids eating popsicles. A playground behind them. Someone handed me a plaque. It read, "The Jerome Wells Center for Justice and Peace." I stood there, overwhelmed. I wasn't sure I deserved it. But then Jaden stepped up with a microphone voice steady. "This place isn't about what happened to Mr. Wells. It's about what he did after. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He fought back with truth." Then he looked straight at me. "And now we all know we can too." Weeks passed, and slowly I began to breathe again. Back in Virginia, reforms rolled out like falling dominoes. Body cam laws strengthened. Citizen oversight boards formed. Chief Torres was reinstated and promoted to oversee police reform statewide. Whitaker. His pension was revoked. His gun license revoked. Last I heard, he fled to Florida. Some said he was trying to disappear. Others said he was being investigated by the IRS for unreported side cash from consulting work. I didn't care. He was irrelevant now. The name that once haunted me had become a footnote, and mine was carved into steel. One afternoon, as I sat with Marissa watching the girls ride bikes, she turned to me. "You're different," she said. "Scarred." "No," she smiled. "Solid, like you've stopped floating." I looked at her. "I've been fighting ghosts for so long. Now I'm just here." She reached for my hand. That's all we ever wanted. And she was right. Not victory, not fame, just peace. Then came the final twist. A letter arrived. From the Bureau. It was short, cold, bureaucratic. "Your termination is under final review. Pending reinstatement is not recommended." I read it twice, then a third time, and I felt nothing. Because for the first time in 20 years I didn't need their badge to define me. I had my own, forged not from silver but from truth. Burnished not by rank but by resistance, and carried not on my chest but in every hand I'd held every voice I'd lifted, every soul I'd refused to let be silenced. Later that night, Kendra curled up beside me and asked, "Daddy, are you ever going to be Agent Wells again?" I looked into her eyes. "No, baby," I said. "I'm just going to be Daddy now." And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. They asked me to speak at the Capitol, not in some echoing back room or obscure committee, but on the floor. Live. National broadcast. The first civilian awarded the Presidential Medal for Civil Courage in nearly 30 years. I almost said no. After everything, I didn't want spotlights. But something inside me whispered, one more time for the boy with the broken nose and the silenced cry. One more time for the girl who sat in the back of a patrol car shaking with shame she didn't earn. One more time for my daughters, for the name Wells, for everyone whose truth was buried in paperwork and dust. So I said yes. I stood beneath the great dome in D.C., where history was carved in stone, and hypocrisy floated in the air like perfume. The room was full. Presidents, senators, judges who once rolled their eyes at the words systemic racism, and across the nation, millions watching from couches, classrooms, street corners. I took a breath, and I began. My name is Jerome Wells. I am a father, a husband, a federal agent, and a survivor. But for most of my life I was taught to whisper in the face of injustice, to wait my turn, to not make it worse, to be grateful for crumbs disguised as equality, until a man pointed a gun at me in a supermarket parking lot. And suddenly I couldn't whisper anymore. The room was frozen, because that gun wasn't aimed at just me. It was aimed at a country that pretends every citizen is equal while writing exceptions in invisible ink. It was aimed at every black boy holding Skittles or cell phones or nothing at all and dying anyway. It was aimed at my daughters, and I won't allow them to grow up thinking silence is safety. I looked around the chamber, eyes burning with memory. I took an oath to protect this country from enemies, foreign and domestic. But no one told me the domestic ones would wear the same uniform I did. Gasps rippled through the room, and I didn't stop. I was suspended for speaking the truth, shot for not staying silent, threatened for defending my dignity. But I survived, and I am not exceptional. I am simply one man who refused to look away. Then I paused, took out a folded paper, a sketch, the one Jaden had drawn, of me, kneeling, holding up my badge like a torch. I held it above the podium. This was given to me by a boy who saw what I went through. He didn't see fear. He saw fire, not to destroy, but to light the way. I stepped back. My name is Jerome Wells, and I will never kneel again except to lift someone else up. The room stood. Tears flowed. Applause thundered. Not because I was a hero, but because I had become a mirror. And they finally looked. The next morning, the president signed the Wells Act, mandatory third-party review boards in every state. Federal prosecution allowed for repeated civil rights violations. Body cam footage made public by default, and a national database tracking decertified officers so that no predator with a badge could hide behind another town's ignorance ever again. And then I went home, back to my garden, to the small house with the sunlit porch and the women I love. Sometimes reporters came by. Sometimes books arrived asking for forewords. Sometimes people cried when they met me. But most of the time, I was just Jerome again, and that was all I needed. One day, a familiar car pulled up. Chief Alana Torres stepped out, a folder in hand. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said. Inside was a photo. Paul Whitaker in orange shackled. He'd finally been arrested on unrelated federal charges. Perjury, tax evasion, obstruction. Karma, I thought, had good aim. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just whispered, "Let it end." Torres looked at me. "You know it never really does." I nodded. "But it's not my fight anymore." That night under the stars, Malia crawled into my lap. "Daddy, what's justice?" I thought for a long moment. Then I said, "Justice is when someone you'll never meet gets to live a full life because you didn't stay quiet." She tilted her head, like planting a tree you won't sit under. I smiled. "Exactly like that." She yawned. "Can I help plant it too?" My heart swelled. "You already are." In the end, justice didn't come from a courtroom, it came from courage. Not just mine, but from every voice that refused to be silenced. Every bystander who hit record. Every child who saw me as more than a victim. Every mother who prayed her son wouldn't be next. The meaning of life isn't found in survival. It's found in what you do with the time you're given. I was given a second chance not to stay quiet, but to speak for those who never got one. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, hopeful, or even just aware, then do something with it. Share it. Talk about it. Teach your children, because change doesn't come from institutions. It comes from us. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that challenge injustice and lift the human spirit. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? How did you respond, like, and share to keep this conversation alive? Because silence helps no one. You have a voice. Use it.